Welcome to the DNX podcast, the #1 resource for entrepreneurs, nomads, and impact-driven souls. And I am your coach, Sylvia Chrisman. I'm here today with my friend Andrew Horan, the founder of Tribute.co. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Sylvia.
I'm so glad you could make the time. I'm actually excited that we're here in person today. We've tried to make this work for a couple of weeks now, and now we're here in Brooklyn.
Let's do it.
So, talk to me a little bit more about your understanding of what modern masculinity means to you.
I love that we're starting there, and this is a topic that I think has become much more clear to me over the past couple of months because of my introduction to a men's movement called Everyman. And so for the first time in my life, I've engaged in a weekly men's group. And what we do is it's 8 men that come together every Tuesday. And the whole point of this is to establish a container where these men can go in and explore how they are feeling in the present moment, how they can connect to whatever emotions are real for them right now. And what it has really made clear to me is that modern masculinity is men allowing themselves to go in and experience the totality of their emotional being, to go in and understand whatever emotions are there, whether that is shame, anger, joy, whatever it is. And I believe that by allowing ourselves to really touch and connect with all of those emotions, we're more able to manage the emotions of other people. We're more capable of connecting with other people as our authentic selves. And I'm a big fan of Gestalt therapy, and that was kind of an answer to Freud and psychoanalysis. And what Fritz Perls and the guys who started Gestalt really believe is that humans act out because we have so many of these emotional impulses inside of us and we don't have an opportunity to explore them. And when we suppress emotions, they inevitably will explode out. And so much of that happens in violent outbursts and aggression, whatever it might be. And so modern masculinity is men committing to this kind of emotional mastery of just experiencing all of themselves and then bringing that person into the world.
Beautiful. So in this age of technology, how do you think communication is actually, and connection is changing?
I mean, this has been a big question that I've been thinking about for the past several years. There's a thing that I like to call the connection crisis. And so technically, while we are more connected as a society than ever before, our ability to communicate, to speak to one another is easier than it's ever been. But if you look at a lot of the research that's been coming out, AARP just did a study of 400,000 senior citizens about 10 years ago and found out that the number of people who identify as lonely has doubled. Gen Z is statistically the loneliest generation of young people that we've ever recorded. The General Social Survey just discovered that the average number of people who identify as having 0 friends has tripled over the past 20 years. Imagine growing up, imagine existing with 0 friends. When you have no close confidants, people you can be yourself with. I really believe that these are the people that will latch on to extreme movements for that sense of belonging. And so loneliness is a true epidemic. It's impacting our individual health, but it's also impacting our societies. And so what I'm really passionate about is building technology that facilitates dialogues that are meaningful, that really do connect us. And so there's a lot of studies around Facebook and Instagram, and people just associate usage with these sites as having a negative impact on our subjective well-being, which is for the most part accurate. But there's actually other surveys that talk about how if you use those services in a different way, they can actually have a positive impact on your subjective well-being and connectivity. One of the best examples of this is that we looked at what they call passive Facebook users. Mm-hmm. So people that are going on Facebook and they're just looking at friends' walls, or they're going to Instagram and they're just trolling posts. So across the board, people that are going on those sites and having these passive experiences have a negative impact on their subjective well-being. But people that are going on those sites and actually commenting, who are actually messaging friends, who are taking a proactive stance, they actually have a more connected experience. They actually feel sometimes much better coming out of those experiences. So I think that now we have a responsibility as technologists, as programmers, as designers, to design for what my friend Tristan Harris calls time well spent. Mm-hmm. And it means that our our KPIs, our key performance indicators, need to go well beyond monthly active users and time on site, because if Instagram is just designing for time on site, but the majority of their users are unhappy when they spend more time on your site, what the fuck are we doing? You know what I mean? It's like there's an inherent contradiction there.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a crop of new technologists that are saying, how do we actually identify the KPIs that are beneficial to our end user? So at Tribute, we actually track something called TOJ. It literally stands for Tears of Joy. How many times can the end recipient of our product cry? And remarkably, 80% of the time they do. We actually track the number of times that people say, I love you on our site. We track, do people feel more connected after using Tribute with their friends? And about 90% of the time, the answer is yes. So as technologists, we need to start to distinguish and work towards these KPIs that are not only accomplishing business objectives, but actually, serving our end users in the ways that they would like to be served.
Yeah. So with the recent events of data security and what your data is being used for, there's been a lot of changes on how Facebook and those platforms want you to use their content and their platforms, right? I remember when first Facebook started as a third culture kid and, as a traveler, as a nomad, and many of our people in our audience are nomads or people that live very far away from their loved ones.
Yeah.
The initial stages of Facebook was an ability to communicate across distance and time and give people an insight into my life and share with them in a passive way when I wasn't able, because of time zone differences, to even communicate, right? And so WhatsApp was great for that. And so video sharing and sharing your information and giving insight into my life and direct messages really improved the quality of my relationships across distance and time.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about that? Like, what is your experience?
I think that everything here comes down to intentionality. And the way I think about that is that think of it as a difference between routine and ritual. Routine is just something that you do all the time subconsciously.
Right.
Ritual is that which we do all the time consciously. And so now that these services have become so ingrained in our lives, we all have a responsibility to ourselves to check in and say, when I do this, how does this routine impact my well-being? And we need to have, the wherewithal to correct course if it's not making us happy. Because for so many of us, just taking the time to acknowledge, okay, when I check Instagram this many times a day, I feel this way. What do I actually want my behavior to be there? And so I think that now, people need to take some of the responsibility in how they're using these platforms, as well as the technologists themselves who are building these platforms. It's a mutual responsibility of those people being more responsible of how they're designing their technology, for sure. But that I think that people in some ways also needs to take some responsibility into establishing, here's how I want to use these things so that it's actually serving me in the way I'd like to.
Do you think there is a link between modern masculinity and communication and connection on those platforms?
I think how I got led to modern masculinity was very related to how I think the umbrella of my real passion lies in just human connection. It was what I lacked growing up in Hawaii and really having, one good friend, but always desiring more, desiring a community, wanting to be myself. And I lacked that. And so in terms of modern masculinity and why it's so important for human connection in general is that I think, again, what modern masculinity does, the practice of it, and it is a practice, it's not like a thing. Modern masculinity is a practice. And when men allow themselves to connect with all parts of themselves, the parts that they may be afraid of, the shadow self, as Jung would say, is that, again, they're more capable of communicating authentically and ultimately from a communication standpoint. I think that communication that leads to connection is 3-tier. It's authenticity, it's curiosity, and it's listening. And so ACL. And that first part of authenticity starts by saying, who am I? Who am I? And no one teaches us how to ask that question when we're coming of age. No one provides the construct to really say, how do you go in? How do you really establish values morals, an understanding of what you're excited about, what you're challenged by right now. And so modern masculinity allows men to reach that level of authenticity, which again is the foundation of meaningful communication in person, online, and elsewhere. So that's why I think that, again, the modern masculinity practice is just a very specific practice. It's going to a group of people that have traditionally not had the space to express vulnerability in this way. And an interesting thing about that I've learned recently is some of my mentors have talked about how men have been taught to emote. And it was the idea that our parents, I'm 30, and so you think about kind of my father, and when he was coming of age, it was primarily women that were raising the children, almost solely. And so what happened is that men were taught to emote in somewhat of like a feminine capacity, much more emotional, compassionate, empathetic, and that what's happened is that there is actually kind of a counter that is a more masculine expression of emotionality, which inherently in my experience is actually allows for some more aggression almost in these emotional states. So when we're doing a circle of men are going deep, but I have the ability while someone is crying to challenge them and say, is that real? What's behind that? And it feels so, I get goosebumps talking about it because again, it's such a rare thing to be able to release that part of myself when we're in this emotional container, but it's so fascinating and it leads to men feeling, at least for me, more connected than I've ever been, feeling so much less alone. And so it's really remarkable work that I'm excited to see, expand into more communities.
Yeah, we actually had Lucas on the podcast
cool.
already.
Amazing.
Yeah, from Every Man. Yeah, we had him on here. We also had a really interesting conversation. You mentioned that you actually measured tears of joy.
Yes.
And what I think is so interesting about this, I grew up with a grandfather that cried. He showed emotions. He cried when he cried tears of joy, and he also cried when he was saddened, deeply moved by something, even deeply moved or even saddened. And to me, that was normal. Yeah. And to me, that was a normal emotional expression that a human being has. And I noticed as I was growing up and encountered other men that were not my grandfather, who was my primary resource, that there was a general consensus of, men don't cry. And that was confusing to me because I thought, why not? And so now that you measure tears of joy, is that gender specific? Can you actually do that?
That is, it's interesting. We probably could break it down between male and female. We definitely could, basically, but we've never made a decision to do that. But when I was listening to you speak, it made me think about my own experience with my own father, and who I felt always so supported by. And I love that you had that experience of having that type of masculine emotionality and vulnerability modeled for you, which is such a powerful thing at a young age. And one of the things that I've taken away from this modern masculinity movement is the ability to ask for what you need and identify what you do need. And having that container as a man to articulate that has been so powerful. Like I had experience with my father recently where, again, I feel so lucky that I've always felt supported by him and infinitely loved. But one thing that he didn't do is he very rarely, if never, said, I love you. Would not say those words. And so much of he said, but you know that you're loved. You know that you're supported. But one of the questions that we ask in men's group is, what do you need more of? And that question of whatever it is real. Yeah. It's real. And as long as it's real, it deserves a voice. And I was able to express that with my father of saying, I know you love me and I feel so supported. And at this stage in our lives, one of the things that you could do to support me would be to tell me that you love me. And he accepted, and it's become a part of our conversations now where we close phones and he tells me that he loves me. And so I think so much of this modern masculinity movement is not only an awareness of self, but an awareness of what you need more of from the people around you and being able to ask for that as opposed to just shutting up, gritting, bearing it, and fighting through. And that's a real big part of this is to empower men to shut up and acknowledge that they don't know it all and that they can ask for help. And it feels like such a burden that is a relief for so many men that get to experience it, to live life in a place of curiosity and learning, as opposed to kind of just this level of sureness, that they have to maintain.
It looks like a very lonely kingdom.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's what we're trying to create, is a more connected kingdom.
Exactly. Yeah. My grandfather was very much the patriarch of our family, but in a very emotionally connected way. So as I ventured out into the world, I found the concepts of masculinity that I encountered very alienating. Yeah. And they seemed very lonely because there was such a detachment from what they needed and what they wanted, and not having a voice is what I always saw in men, that they didn't feel like they had a voice. They weren't allowed to say what they needed or wanted or felt.
Totally.
Because they're supposed to be that rock in, I don't even know, the lonely kingdom, maybe?
Yeah. Well, I think that, again, it's just like what we equate to strength for so long was that aggression and that dominance, and you feel a shift that's happening. I think, like, honestly, one of the seminal works is definitely, you look at like Brené Brown talking about vulnerability, which she definitely connects with the majority of a female audience, but also connects with so many men. Yeah. And like that articulation for people of like the strength and courage in vulnerability and opening that up. And what's cool is that I think that for men especially, we're so inclined for what one of these teachers, Owen Marcus, calls insight and understanding, or understanding and insight. And it's like problem and solution. And so for so much of our lives, we live in this arena of feeling an emotion, understanding, and then insight, which is the solution. How do we solve it? How do we move past it? You know what I mean? And that's where we derive our strength, is our ability to solve shit. And what the modern masculinity movement has showed me is that so much of courage and strength lies in your ability to just go a level deeper, to continue to explore, as opposed to feeling some anger, some frustration, and being like, what can I do right now to fix this? To stop, pause. What's behind that? Where does that come from? What do I need right now? And allowing yourself to actually explore those emotions. And it's the idea that when men afford themselves a little bit of time to connect with those emotions, to connect with the deeper story, we still live 99% of our lives in that problem and solution mode. That's so ingrained in us that like we're never going to get out of it completely. You know what I mean? It's like, so that's what we say. It's like I always set that container of like the goal in just a sliver of your life is just to explore inwards. And that if you can do that, in Gestalt, they say that with awareness comes choice. The more that you're aware of, the more capable you are of making choices and taking actions that are aligned with the totality of you. And so, you'll go back to that problem and solution part of your life with more of an awareness of who you are. And it's powerful. My buddy Paul sent me something yesterday about Carl Jung, and he talks about the shadow self. And he says, like, if we do not unearth the subconscious, we will call it fate and accept it for what it is, And so I think that's just so powerful to provide a platform for people to explore all of themselves. And it's been pretty incredible.
What's been the biggest shift for you since you joined this men's group?
The biggest shift. I love that question. The biggest shift for me, oh man, I'm going to share it because I had a hesitation. I didn't want to share it. And that's exactly, what we would say. What we would say in a men's group is we would say, what's the thing that you don't want to say? That's the shit that you have to say. Yeah. Like you have to honor our covenant and say that. And so the biggest shift for me has honestly been in my relationship with my partner, Mickey. And so we're going on 8 years. We have a 1-year-old son. We're very madly, deeply connected and in love. And Mickey is an incredible entrepreneur. And she's also this really domineering, powerful force. And she exists really in her masculine in business. And it's incredibly effective and powerful and brilliant to watch. And I think that my general nature has always been more kind of tranquillo and chill. And what came to me, one of the shifts, was this idea that trying to maintain this levelness in our relationship, even in the presence of anger and frustration, because I wanted to be that rock of stability and all these other things. And what I learned in men's group was the idea that like when you're feeling these things, to express them. And it's like, and consciously expressing anger is not throwing a chair at a window or hurting someone. That's not conscious expression of anger. But if you are feeling something, the ability to express that honestly in the moment. And so one of the big shifts in our relationship that I've found is that when I feel frustration or anger, there's a recognition, and then there's a pause, and then there's a conscious expression of it, a voice of it. And sometimes it can be even more forceful and direct. But that what happens in these moments is that, and this is again our specific dynamic, is that Mickey is so much in her masculine throughout the day. And when I bring that into our conversations, it allows her to reset in her feminine. And we've been working through disagreements and arguments so much quicker than we ever have. And it's been a beautiful shift. And then even how that's kind of like transitioned into like our sex life and the ability to acknowledge one of the powerful questions we talked about are, what are the sexual urges that you feel shame around? And starting to acknowledge those and go deeper and be so real, and to have, the words to describe these feelings, and to feel the shift of how she's been able to meet me and receive me, and what that's done for just like the sexual energy that exists between us. So the biggest transformation for me has been how I am communicating and expressing myself in the relationship, and how we have connected since then, which is great. And that's been the arc of our relationship, but I feel more connected to her and happier than we've ever been. And I would say so much of it is due to this men's group. And just again, for anyone who's listening, I've been doing this for 2.5 months. So it's like 2.5 months, and I've been mentored by a coach for a long time, and now working with one of the facilitators to really go deep on it. But, this is to think about the effort that I've put into this versus the insight, the learnings, the understanding of who I am is really just, it's remarkable. So I think that anyone who's interested in this kind of connection and to really kind of getting to know themselves on a deeper level, that this type of work is an amazing touch point that's accessible to a lot of people right now.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So if someone's listening and they're really resonating with this, especially the male audiences, I'm assuming, what would be a good place for them to start if they're not in the States? Like, what could they do? One thing.
One thing that they could do, I would say, would be to go to everyman.co, and that's everyman.co. That's a great place to see where there are men's groups in your town. But even for those of you who may not have one in your town, there's a really beautiful construct. It's free to do to start your own group, and walks you through the steps of doing that. So that's one thing that you can absolutely do today. And outside of that, I think that, on the technology front, with tribute.co, if any of you have people in your life that have had a massive impact, who might have a birthday or a wedding or anything coming up. We didn't really talk about it, but what Tribute does is allows you to send a collaborative video montage of everyone you know, telling someone why you love them. We call it the most meaningful gift on earth. And so if anyone you really love has one of those coming up, please visit tribute.co. You can do that in a couple of days, and it will transform your connection and relationship with whoever the recipient is, and you'll likely get some of those tears of joy. So that would be the two recommendations I would definitely have for people to start in on both of this work.
Yeah, I love your platform. In our circle of friends, it's used so much, and I've been part of so many, and it's such a beautiful way to wish somebody a happy birthday and how much you love them or whatever else they're celebrating by simply sending them a video, and then they get this amazing collage.
Yeah, well, I think that kind of sets us up on probably a beautiful close, and that is that when I think of meaningful human connection, I think of 4 values that need to be expressed, and it's vulnerability, appreciation, support, and trust.
Yes.
So I think great relationships are vast, and one of those pillars is appreciation, and so you need to feel seen, heard, and support, or you need to basically feel appreciated, and you need to give appreciation. And so one of the things that I encourage people to think about is, like, we all grew up with this saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all.
Right.
I don't know if they had that one in Germany.
Yes, they do.
And I was looking at this actually before I was getting ready to do a TEDx talk at Burning Man. And I remember that I was looking at that statement written down, and then what I realized is that if you remove the don'ts, that the statement becomes infinitely more powerful. And it is, if you have anything nice to say, say it all. And it is the idea that for so many of us, we have so much of this appreciation, of this gratitude of like, I just looked at you and I was like, wow, you look like so fit. And I just thought that, but there's no pause. Like, why would I keep that inside? It's like anytime someone is doing something that you appreciate or someone helps you, I promise you, there is no reason to keep any of that appreciation inside of you. It's that the moment that you express that, it becomes real for the recipient, for you. It is one of the pillars of meaningful connection. And the more that you can just remove that barrier to expressing appreciation, the more connected you will feel to the people around you, and the more consistently you'll be grounded in this practice of gratitude. And so that would be one thing that anyone can do in their lives today with their parents, with their friends, with their spouse, with their kids, that really will transform your life. And so do that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Yes. Beautiful. And we're going to put all the links below too so people can find you and take a look at Tribute as well. So
amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Before I leave you, I want to invite you into my world. Join us at the DNX Festival in September in Lisbon. If you go to our website and use the promo code podcast50, you get an extra €50 off your ticket. And subscribe to this channel and leave us a review if you can. We will review these frequently, and you can leave us a question that we will answer live online. Until next time.